When Linda Thompson turned 70, she expected her golden years to be warm and filled with family gatherings, laughter, and the comfort of her children's presence. She had raised 3 kids in a small suburban town in Ohio, giving them everything she could: her time, her energy, her money, and her heart. But life, she realized, didn't always follow the script you wrote for it. Her oldest son, Michael, had moved to California years ago for work. He visited occasionally, but phone calls were short, rushed, and filled with background noise from his busy household. Her daughter, Rebecca, lived just 2 towns over, yet months would pass without seeing her because she was buried in her own career and family responsibilities. The youngest, Daniel, had chosen a life of travel, always somewhere new, his social media full of sunsets in Bali and street markets in Morocco. Linda was proud of them, but in the quiet evenings when the house felt too large and the TV droned on, she wondered when her role in their lives had become more of an afterthought. At first, she tried not to dwell on it. She told herself it was just the natural course of life. But the loneliness had a way of creeping in like a slow fog, clouding her sense of purpose. She remembered the advice of her late husband, John. Never let your happiness depend on someone else's schedule. Those words, which once sounded philosophical, now rang like a challenge she needed to accept. One rainy afternoon, while sipping tea by the kitchen window, she made a decision. If her children couldn't be her primary source of happiness, health, and peace, she would build those things herself. Not out of resentment, but out of a fierce need to reclaim her independence. She didn't know it yet, but this decision would lead her down a path that would completely transform the rest of her life. The first thing she learned to rely on was her own physical well-being. It started with a simple morning walk around the block. Linda had never been much of an athlete, but the act of getting fresh air, stretching her legs, and feeling the rhythm of her steps gave her a small but powerful sense of accomplishment. Her neighbor, George Miller, a retired firefighter, noticed her one morning and invited her to join the local senior fitness group at the community center. The first class was intimidating, people her age lifting light weights, doing chair yoga, and even dancing. She felt awkward, out of shape, and a little self-conscious. But George gave her a grin and said, "We all start somewhere. The goal isn't to be the strongest person here, it's to be the happiest one." Slowly, Linda began attending twice a week. She noticed her posture improving, her joints aching less, and her sleep getting better. Even her mood lifted. It dawned on her that waiting for her children to make time for her wasn't going to keep her healthy. She had to do that herself. The second thing Linda embraced was community. She joined a local volunteer group that worked with the public library, delivering books to homebound seniors. This gave her more than just something to do. It gave her people to connect with who shared her values. She met a woman named Carol Jenkins, a retired teacher with a wicked sense of humor, and the two became fast friends. They'd share coffee after deliveries, swapping stories about the people they met. Carol was blunt about life. One afternoon, she told Linda, "Listen, family is wonderful, but you can't put your entire emotional bank account in one place. You need friends, neighbors, people you choose to have in your life." That hit Linda hard. For years, her entire social world had revolved around her children and their families. Now, she was beginning to see the richness of connections beyond bloodlines. The third change came when Linda began focusing on her personal passions. She had always loved painting, but had stopped years ago because life had gotten too busy. One day, while browsing a thrift shop, she spotted an old set of oil paints and a dusty easel. Without hesitation, she bought them. At first, her strokes were rusty, her colors muddy, but she didn't care. She painted sunsets, gardens, even a portrait of her late husband. She posted a few pictures online, and to her surprise, people began asking if she sold them. She didn't paint for money, but the encouragement fueled her. Creating art gave her a deep sense of peace that no amount of waiting for her children's attention ever could. She realized she wasn't just passing the time, she was feeding her soul. The fourth thing she learned to lean on was financial independence. Linda wasn't wealthy, but she had a modest pension and some savings. For years, She'd hesitated to spend money on herself, always thinking she might need it for her kids or emergencies. But now she began budgeting for her own needs and desires. She took a cooking class, signed up for a short trip to Maine with a travel group, and even invested in a new recliner for her reading nook. She also became more cautious, reading up on scams targeting seniors, consulting a financial advisor, and making sure her resources would last. There was a quiet dignity in knowing she didn't have to rely on anyone else for her basic needs. The fifth and perhaps most profound shift was learning to rely on her own inner peace. For this, Linda turned to mindfulness. At first, meditation felt strange, just sitting still, breathing, and letting thoughts drift by. But she found that starting her mornings with 10 minutes of silence helped her feel grounded. She downloaded an app that guided her through gratitude exercises, where she would focus on small joys: the warmth of sunlight through her window, the taste of her morning coffee, the sound of birds outside. She realized that peace didn't come from external events. It came from how she chose to respond to them. When Michael called hurriedly, instead of feeling hurt, she felt glad to hear his voice at all. When Rebecca canceled a lunch date, Linda simply rescheduled without bitterness. Her emotional balance no longer hinged on their choices. Months passed, and Linda noticed something surprising. The more she built her own life, the more her children seemed to want to be part of it. Michael asked about her art. Rebecca came to a fitness class with her one Saturday. Daniel even called from Europe to ask her advice about a project he was working on. They hadn't changed dramatically. Life was still busy for them, but Linda had changed. She no longer felt like a forgotten figure waiting in the wings. She was the main character in her own life again. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, George stopped by with a bag of fresh peaches from his garden. "You look different these days," he remarked. "Happier." Linda smiled. "I am. I used to think my happiness depended on my family showing up. Now I know it depends on me showing up for myself." And with that, she understood that her golden years were not a slow fade into the background. They were a chance to shine in ways she never had before.